Only 20 were made. It had no radio, no heater, and Chevy lied about its horsepower. The 1967 L88 Corvette wasn't just built for speed, it was built to break rules. While Chevy claimed it made 430 horsepower, the truth was closer to 550, making it too wild for everyday drivers. It wasn't even advertised to the public, and today, this ultra-rare Corvette is worth millions at auction, with collectors fighting for a piece of its untamed legacy. But what made this car so dangerous and legendary that it had to be kept a secret? The story of the 1967 L88 Corvette begins with a man named Zora Arkus Duntov. If you're into Corvettes, you've likely heard of him. He's often called the father of the Corvette. Zora had a dream, and it was to make the Corvette a true American sports car that could compete with European giants like Ferrari and Porsche. But there was a problem. Chevrolet had an official ban on racing at the time. However, Zora wasn't one to let a little red tape get in the way of horsepower. So, he had a clever way to keep his dream alive. He built a car that was meant for the track, but hid it in plain sight. The L88 Corvette was born from this rebellion. The engine, a 427 cubic inch V8, was more powerful than anything Chevrolet had released before. It wasn't designed for a casual Sunday drive, and it wasn't built for comfort. It was built to go fast, plain and simple. The L88 wasn't even mentioned in Chevy's sales brochure at first, so only those in the know could order it. It wasn't meant for your average driver, it was built for racers who could handle its raw power. Think of it as the iron block version of Chevrolet's later aluminium ZL1 engine. Zora understood that races were won not just on the track, but in the showroom as well. So, he kept finding ways to sneak race-ready Corvettes into Chevrolet's lineup. Even though GM, they had a corporate ban on racing, the L88 was all about maximizing performance, and it shared some key components with other 427 big block engines, like the 4-bolt main block. But the similarities ended there. The L88 was far more aggressive, featuring a higher 12.5:1 compression ratio, forged pistons, a solid lifter camshaft, and a Holley 850 CFM carburetor, the largest carburetor ever used by GM at the time. The engine also had lightweight aluminium cylinder heads, which reduced the weight by around 70 pounds compared to the standard iron heads. This engine required 103 octane fuel to run at full potential, which shows just how much power it was built to handle. In its first year of production, only 20 L88 Corvettes were made, making the 1967 model incredibly rare. This low number, it wasn't due to a lack of demand, it was a strategic move by Chevrolet to keep the L88 a secret weapon on the racetrack. By 1968, word had spread, and 80 L88s were built that year. The final production year, 1969, saw 116 L88 Corvettes roll off the assembly line. This L88 short production run adds to its mystique and makes it one of the rarest and most valuable Corvettes in history. The car didn't come with any luxuries. There were no heaters, no radios, and not even air conditioning. Why? Well, because adding those extras would have made the car heavier and therefore slower. The L88 was stripped down to be as light as possible, so it could go faster on the track. The only focus was on performance, which is why this Corvette was so different from the models that came before it. When the L88 first hit the market, Chevy claimed it had 430 horsepower, but here's the catch. That number was intentionally lowballed. When tested on a dyno, the L88 actually cranked out closer to 550 to 560 horsepower, about 130 more than Chevy advertised. Why the secrecy? Because Chevy, they didn't want the L88 to fall into the hands of inexperienced drivers who might not be able to handle its insane power. The car also needed to meet certain racing rules that required engines to be under a specific power limit. By underreporting the horsepower, Chevy made it easier for the L88 to qualify for races, while still being one of the most powerful cars of its time. Now, let's talk about how this beast performed. The L88 was really a track monster. With a 4-speed manual transmission, nicknamed the Rock Crusher, heavy-duty disc brakes, and a special suspension, the L88 was designed for serious racing. The engine, with its high-compression pistons and aggressive camshaft, was fed by a huge Holley carburetor, which helped it gulp down as much fuel and air as possible. The result was a roaring engine that could easily reach 6,400 RPMs. Driving the L88? Well, it wasn't easy though. The engine would often overheat in normal traffic, so it was more suited for the track than the road. It was also pretty hard to handle, especially for drivers who weren't used to its aggressive behavior. You had to really know what you were doing to drive this car effectively. That's why Chevy didn't market it heavily. They didn't just want anyone buying it. This made the L88 even rarer, and it's one of the reasons why it's considered a legendary car today. One of the earliest owners of the L88 was a man named Robert E. Baker. In 1967, Robert was a sailor on the USS Firedrake, an ammunition ship that had just returned from a 6-month deployment. As soon as he got back to California, Robert wanted a car that was as powerful as possible. He traded in his '66 Corvette for a brand new 1967 L88. He even used it as his daily driver at first, which is surprising considering how raw and powerful this car was. Later, he focused on drag racing, putting the L88 on a trailer and hauling it to tracks across the country. But in 1969, Robert had a towing mishap that caused some damage to the car. After that, he decided to store it in his family's barn, where it stayed for over a decade. The car was later sold and restored in the 1980s. It even earned a Bloomington Gold certification, which is a big deal in the Corvette world because it means the car is as close to the original as possible. In 2018, this very L88 was sold for nearly $3 million, making it one of the most expensive Corvettes ever sold. The story of the L88 Corvette gets even more interesting when you realize that it was the pinnacle of Corvette racing in its time. In fact, at the 2024 Mecum auction in Kissimmee, Florida, both the first and the last L88 Corvettes are being sold as a single package, an extremely rare offering. The first L88, a 1967 convertible, is finished in tuxedo black and has an impressive racing pedigree. It was campaigned by Tony DiLorenzo and Jerry Thompson in 1967, earning sponsorship from Owens Corning and Hanley Dawson Chevrolet. It even took second place at the 1967 Daytona Beach SCCA runoffs, proving that the L88 wasn't just powerful on paper, it could perform under pressure on the track. The last L88 Corvette, built in 1969, is just as special. It's finished in Fathom Green with a saddle leather interior and retains its original documentation, including the Project O-Plate title and CCAS affirmation. The car has been meticulously restored by Jim Thorpe, and like the first L88, it's equipped with an M22 manual transmission. This L88 is a true numbers-matching car, meaning that all its components are original and authentic, which significantly adds to its value. Today, only a few 1967 L88 Corvettes are left, and each one is worth millions. The L88's rarity and its reputation as a hidden gem make it a collector's dream. While the L88 was produced for 3 years, from 1967 to 1969, the 1967 model is the most sought after because it was the first and the rarest, with only 20 being made. When we compare the 1967 L88 to modern Corvettes, like the C8, the differences are striking. The L88 was all about raw power. It felt untamed, almost like it wanted to break free from the driver's control. It had no modern features, not even a radio, and its focus was purely on speed. The C8, on the other hand, it's a different story. It's sleek, it's comfortable, and it's packed with technology. It comes with air conditioning, touchscreen infotainment, heated seats, and other modern amenities that the L88 could never dream of. The biggest change, though, is in the C8's design. Its mid-engine, which was a huge shift for Corvette. It's something Zora Arkus Duntov, the father of Corvette, always wanted. The new design improves handling, giving it a more balanced feel compared to the front-engine L88. In the C8, you don't get the same sense of danger or unpredictability. You can drive it fast, but it's a more controlled experience. It's got advanced features like traction control, launch control, and an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission, making it much more forgiving for the average driver. Power-wise, the L88 claimed 430 horsepower on paper, but dyno tests showed it actually made around 550. Meanwhile, the C8 makes about 495 horsepower, and newer versions, like the C8 ZR1, are expected to produce over 1,000 horsepower. It's clear that today's Corvettes have more horsepower, but they deliver it differently. The C8's power is smoother, easier to manage, and more refined. The L88's power, in contrast, came with a roar and a heavy dose of aggression. Then there's the C6 and C7 generations, which came before the C8. The C6, launched in 2005, brought back some classic Corvette design elements, and it introduced models like the 2008 ZR1 with 647 horsepower. It was fast, but still manageable compared to the wild L88. The C7, introduced in 2014, pushed things even further with sharper styling, and the 2015 Z06, which cranked out 650 horsepower. Both were fast and powerful, but they didn't have the same rebellious spirit as the L88. Instead, they represented a gradual evolution toward the C8's more exotic mid-engine design. In terms of cost, the C8, it's much more accessible, starting at around $60,000. It's a fraction of what an L88 costs today. L88 Corvettes can go for millions at auctions, thanks to their rarity and history. The C8, though impressive, it just doesn't have the same mystique. It's a fantastic car, but it's built to be a mainstream performance vehicle, while the L88, it was a secret weapon designed for racers. The L88 stands as a symbol of rebellion and the wild side of American muscle, while the C8 represents the peak of modern performance. They're both incredible, but in very different ways. The L88 is about raw, untamed power and the spirit of racing, while the C8 is about pushing the limits of technology and design. The legacy of the L88 set the stage for what Corvettes could become, but it's the modern Corvettes, like the C8, that are taking that legacy into the future. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which car you'd like us to explore next.